The last thing my grandmother gave me before she died was a folded envelope and a warning. She pressed it into my hands in the hallway outside her hospital room, and she said, "Don't open this until you have something of your own, something your mother cannot reach." I was 18 years old. I didn't fully understand what she meant by that. I do now. My mother built heartily fine interiors from nothing. I want to be clear about that because it matters. She started with a single rented van, a second-hand upholstery stapler, and a client list she cold-called from the Yellow Pages in 1991 in Burlington, Ontario. By the time I was in high school, Hartley Fine Interiors had a showroom on Lakeshore Road, 14 full-time employees, and a reputation that stretched from Oakville to Niagara-on-the-Lake. She furnished the offices of 3 provincial MPPs and the private dining rooms of 2 of Burlington's oldest private clubs. She was, by any reasonable measure, extraordinary. She was also the kind of person who had decided, very early on, that being extraordinary required absolute control over everything in her orbit, including me. My older brother Wade understood this instinctively. By the time he turned 24, he was managing the commercial contract side of the business and speaking in the same shorthand my mother used. The language of margins and vendor relationships and quarterly forecasting. He wore it easily. I watched him and thought, I don't know how he does that. I watched him and thought, I cannot do that. What I could do was make things with my hands. Specifically, I could throw pottery. I discovered it at 15 in a Saturday morning community class at the Burlington Arts Centre, and I want to describe what that first session felt like because I think it's important. You sit at the wheel and the clay is cold and stubborn, and your hands are completely wrong for it, and then something shifts, some small surrender of control, and the clay begins to open. It's one of the only things I have ever experienced that requires you to be simultaneously completely present and completely patient. I was not, by nature, a patient person, but at the wheel I became one. I spent the next 3 years going to that class every Saturday morning without missing a single session. I bought clay with my babysitting money. I built a small kiln shed in the backyard with materials I sourced from a closing ceramic studio in Hamilton. My grandmother, who everyone called Gran Bette, was the only adult in my family who came to see what I was making. She would stand in a shed doorway with her tea and ask questions about the glazing process with a kind of genuine curiosity that made me feel like what I was doing was worth understanding. My mother's view was different. She didn't dismiss it cruelly, at least not at first. She called it my hobby, the way you call something a hobby when you've already decided it has no future. She said I had a gift for aesthetics and that I should channel it into interior design, which was a real profession, which had a real infrastructure, which already existed and was already profitable, and already had my name on a desk waiting for me. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Sunday evening in March, the spring. I turned 19. I had been accepted to the ceramics program at OCAD University in Toronto. Not with a conditional offer, a full entrance scholarship, which covered tuition and came with a studio access grant. The letter from the department also included a handwritten note from the program director, who had reviewed the portfolio I submitted, which included photographs of 47 pieces I had made over 3 years, along with a written statement about my approach to functional wear and the relationship between form and daily use. The director wrote that my sense of scale was, in her words, unusually mature for a self-taught applicant. I read that line so many times the paper started to soften at the fold. I left the acceptance package on the kitchen island on a Sunday evening because that was when my mother reviewed the week's correspondence. I placed 3 of my best bowls around it, a large serving bowl in a deep teal ash glaze, 2 smaller pasta bowls in warm terracotta with a raw interior edge. I had made all 3 that winter. They were, I thought, the best things I had made. I waited in the living room. My mother came in from the garage. She set down her bag. She looked at the island. She picked up the letter. She read it standing up, which was how she read everything that required a decision. She set it down. Then she picked up the teal bowl, turned it over, looked at the foot ring, and set it back down with the same careful efficiency she used when returning a fabric swatch she'd already decided against. She told me the scholarship was a recognition of real talent. She said that. And then she said that OCAD was a school for people who wanted to become artists, and that becoming an artist in Canada was a path that led, for most people, directly to financial precarity. She said the ceramics market was saturated. She said the crafts economy depended on trends she had watched cycle through the interior design world for 20 years, and that handmade pottery was currently having a moment, but moments ended. She said I had a genuine eye and that channeling it into the design side of heartily fine interiors made far more practical sense than spending 4 years accumulating student debt in pursuit of a career that would require me to sell mugs at farmers' markets. I told her the scholarship meant no student debt, that it covered everything. She looked at me the way she looked at contractors who came in over budget, calm, assessing, not angry, which was somehow worse than angry. She said that even if the schooling was funded, the life afterward was not. She said she was not going to support a path she didn't believe in. No apartment help when I eventually left Toronto. No fallback. No position at the company I could return to if things didn't work. She said she'd been building something for our family and that walking away from it to play with clay was not a decision she could respect. I told her I had already decided. She picked up the teal bowl. The serving bowl I had spent 3 sessions getting right, the one with the glaze I had mixed myself from a recipe I'd been developing for months. She walked to the kitchen side counter. She put it down on the recycling bin lid with a small final click, like she was shelving something she was done with. She told me that handmade ceramics were a lovely accessory category, not a livelihood. That I was mistaking a pastime for a profession. That she hoped I would reconsider before I made a choice I couldn't undo. Then she picked up her bag and went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The bowl sat on the recycling bin. I went to my room, and I opened the envelope my grandmother had given me the previous autumn, the one I had carried in the inside pocket of my winter coat for 7 months without opening. Gran Bette had died in November, 3 weeks after pressing it into my hands. I had kept my promise. The note inside was written in her handwriting, which was very small and very precise, the handwriting of someone who had grown up being careful with paper. It said, Scotiabank, branch at Guelph Line, account under Bet Eleanor Hartley, the access word is your first kiln. I have been watching you build something true. Use this to build something real. My first kiln. The one I'd built in the shed. I have named it, the way you name things you're proud of. I'd called it Steadfast. I had told Gran Bette this one afternoon when she came to look at it, and she had smiled like she was filing the information away. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. Then I packed a single duffel bag, my wheel tools, and the 2 pasta bowls, which I wrapped in a sweater. I did not take the teal bowl from the recycling bin. I thought about it. I left it there. Toronto in April is unpredictable, which suited me. I had a room in a shared house near Lansdowne with 3 other OCAD students, which cost $850 a month, and smelled permanently of turpentine and someone's sourdough starter. The scholarship stipend was enough to cover rent and groceries if I was careful. I was very careful. 3 days after arriving, I took the GO train to Burlington, walked to the Scotiabank branch on Guelph Line, and gave the teller the access word. Gran Bette had been depositing into that account since I was 11 years old. Since the year she first watched me, at a cousin's birthday party, spend 45 minutes carefully making a lopsided coil pot out of modelling clay while everyone else played outside. She had never mentioned the account, not at Christmas, not in any of the long phone calls where she asked about my glazes and my firing schedules the way other grandmothers asked about school marks. The balance was $19,400. I sat on a bench outside the bank for a long time. It was a Tuesday. A man walked by, walking a very old golden retriever, and nodded at me like he understood something. I did not touch that money for comfort. I treated it as capital, which is what Gran Bette had intended. I used a portion of it to rent a shared studio space in the Bloor Street West Arts District 3 evenings a week from a collective of working ceramicists who needed to offset their overhead. I used another portion to buy a second-hand electric kiln from a retiring studio potter in Etobicoke, who sold it to me for $600, and threw in 2 boxes of commercial glazes she no longer used. I developed a line during my first year at OCAD that I kept calling functional because I was afraid to call it anything more ambitious. Bowls, mugs, small serving dishes, each one made to be used daily, not displayed. I had a specific idea about what a well-made object felt like in your hands during an ordinary morning: the weight of a coffee mug, the way a bowl's rim meets your lip, the small sensory decision of picking something up and feeling it was right. I thought about this constantly. I refined each piece the way an editor refines a sentence, cutting until only the necessary remained. By second year, I had a name. I called it Groundwork Ceramics. I chose the word deliberately. Groundwork. The foundational work before anything can be built. Also, the ground itself, the clay, the literal material of the thing. I applied for a table at the Evergreen Brickworks Farmers Market in Toronto's Don Valley. My first Sunday, I made $112. By the following spring, I had a 4-month wait list for custom commissions. I finished my degree with distinction. My thesis collection, 12 pieces exploring the relationship between vessel scale and daily domestic ritual, was selected for the graduating exhibition and reviewed in 2 Toronto arts publications. One reviewer described my work as quietly insistent, which I wrote in pencil on the wall above my wheel and have never painted over. I did not invite my mother to the graduation. Wade came, alone, on his own initiative. He brought me a coffee from the vendor outside and stood beside me in the gallery looking at my thesis pieces for a long time without saying anything. Finally he said, "They're really good, Rosalind." That was all. It was enough. The years that followed were not easy in any sense that people mean when they say something wasn't easy. They were the specific difficulty of building something real, which is different from difficulty imposed from outside. I moved to Hamilton's James Street North neighborhood because the arts community there was active and the commercial rents were still possible for a small independent studio. I signed a lease on a 750 square foot ground floor space that had been a picture framing shop. I painted the walls the color of raw clay. I built my shelving from Douglas fir planks I sourced from a salvage yard in Dundas and finished by hand. I hired my first assistant at month 5. Her name was Petra, and she had just finished a craft and design diploma at Mohawk College and needed somewhere to learn the production side. I paid her what I could, which was not very much. She never once complained. She learned faster than anyone I have ever worked with, and she brought a precision to the repetitive tasks, the wedging, the handle pulling, the glaze application, that freed me to develop new work. I started paying her more as soon as I could, which took about 8 months to become something reasonable. By the 3rd year, Groundwork Ceramics had been featured in Azura magazine and in 2 national gift guides. A writer for the Globe and Mail visited the studio and described the Hamilton operation as a small enterprise with an unusually clear point of view. I kept my public presence deliberately minimal. I gave interviews about the process. I talked about clay bodies and glaze chemistry and the specific humidity problems of firing in a Canadian winter. I redirected personal questions back to the work. This wasn't strategy. I simply didn't have anything personal I wanted to give away. The work was the thing. My mother knew eventually. The design world in Ontario is smaller than it appears from the outside. Wade told me, about 2 years after I left Burlington, that she had seen the Azura piece. He said she'd read it, and then put the magazine down and said, "It's a nice little operation." I thanked him for telling me and went back to the kiln. 4 months ago, a man named Fletcher Ashby walked into my studio on a Tuesday morning when I was trimming a batch of cereal bowls. He wore a well-cut grey jacket and carried a slim leather portfolio. He introduced himself as the Director of Commercial Partnerships for Norwood House, a group that operates 11 boutique hotel properties across British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario. The kind of properties where the rooms have real art on the walls and the breakfast table is set with objects someone actually chose. Their hospitality director had recently determined that the one product category where they consistently could not find a supplier who met their standard was tableware. not decorative pieces, functional wear that could withstand daily commercial use while still feeling like something a person would choose to own. Fletcher set a proposal sheet on my work table, directly next to a trimmed bowl that hadn't dried yet. Norwood House wanted a 3-year exclusive wholesale partnership with Groundwork Ceramics. The initial contract value was $340,000 CAD. They wanted a custom collection, their name nowhere on it, the pieces to carry only the Groundwork mark. They wanted the story available to guests who asked. They were not interested in a manufactured brand. They wanted the real one. I read the terms. I asked Fletcher for 72 hours to review with my lawyer. He said to take a week. He bought 4 mugs on his way out. That evening I was at my wheel, not throwing, just sitting with my hands on the clay, when my phone rang. Ontario area code, Burlington Exchange. I answered. My mother did not begin with small talk. She began the way she always began things that mattered to her, efficiently, without preamble. She said she had heard about the Norwood House offer. She said she'd heard it through 2 contacts in the Ontario hospitality sector, which was accurate. That world is very small. She said she was calling with a proposal. Hartley Fine Interiors was contracting. The residential design market had softened significantly in the Burlington-Oakville corridor following 2 years of interest rate increases. 2 of her largest long-term clients had paused renovation projects indefinitely. Wade was managing the cash flow carefully, but the revenue gap was real. She was looking at the first genuine decline in the company's history. Her proposal was structured like all her proposals, clear, logical, confident. She wanted Groundwork Ceramics to operate as a product division of Hartley Fine Interiors. She would provide her existing client relationships, her showroom space on Lakeshore as a retail presence, and the Hartley name, which she said still carried significant weight in the regional design community. In exchange, I would cede 40% equity in Groundwork to her company and relocate production to a commercial space she would lease in Burlington. She said it made obvious sense. She said the 2 businesses complemented each other naturally. She used the phrase aligned vision, and I noticed she did not pause on it. I listened to the entire proposal without speaking. Then I said I would think about it and call her back. This wasn't true, I already knew. But I needed to sit with what I knew long enough to be certain it was coming from somewhere solid, not from the part of me that was still, after all these years, that 19-year-old standing in the kitchen watching her put my bowl on the recycling bin. The next morning I drove out to the escarpment, to a pull-off I know above Dundas Valley, where you can see the whole bowl of the valley laid out below, the tree canopy, and the creek line, and the city beyond. I sat on the hood of my car in the early light. I thought about $19,400 and the word steadfast. I thought about Wade in the gallery saying, "They're really good," and then going quiet. I thought about $112 on my first market Sunday. I thought about Petra arriving before the studio opened every single morning for 3 years. I drove back to Hamilton. I called my lawyer. I signed a Norwood House contract. Then I called my mother. I told her I was declining her proposal. I told her I understood the business rationale and that I genuinely hoped Hartley Fine Interiors stabilized because my mother had built something real and I respected that without qualification. Then I told her the truth about what I had needed to say for a long time, not from anger. I had spent the anger long before this conversation, but because it was simply accurate and she deserved to hear it plainly. I told her that the evening she put my bowl on the recycling bin, she was not protecting me from a difficult path. She was protecting herself from the discomfort of watching me choose something she couldn't control. I understood the difference now. I understood that what she had built, the company, the reputation, the infrastructure, had cost her something, had required a kind of total commitment that made everything outside it feel like a threat. I didn't hold that against her. But I needed her to know that the path she called impractical was the path that had led me to a contract that would sustain my business and the people who worked in it for the next 3 years and very likely beyond. I told her I was not interested in becoming a division of Hartley Fine Interiors. I had built my own name. I was not willing to fold it into someone else's, including hers. The line was quiet. Then she said, and I want to be precise about this because it is the truest thing she has said to me in a long time. Your Gran Bette always said you were the one who would go furthest. She said it quietly, without her usual register of authority. She just said it. I said, she was right about most things. I said goodbye. I was not unkind. Unkind would have been easy. I didn't want easy. I wanted true. The Norwood House partnership launched 6 weeks after signing. The first collection, 48 pieces across mugs, bowls, side plates, and a small serving dish, went into 4 properties in the first rollout. By the end of the quarter, all 11 properties had placed standing orders. I hired Petra as my studio manager. I brought on 2 additional production ceramicists. I expanded into the adjacent unit when the framing shop on my left vacated. On the shelf above my kiln, between a worn copy of a Daniel Rhodes ceramics manual and a hygrometer I've had since OCAD, there is a small piece of fired clay. It's not a finished piece. It's a test tile, unglazed, from the very first batch I ever fired in Gran Bette's backyard shed. There is a thumb impression in one corner, mine at 15, pressing too hard because I didn't know yet how to be light. I have never glazed it. I have never needed to. Gran Bette taught me something I did not have the language for until much later. She taught it through patience and small envelopes and 17 years of quiet deposits at a branch on Guelph line. She taught me that building something real is not a single decision but a sustained practice, like any craft, like keeping a kiln at temperature, like returning to the wheel every morning regardless of whether the previous day went well. My mother built something extraordinary. I mean that. 30 years of a business that employed people and endured market shifts and survived the specific difficulty of being a woman building a company in a field where the clients wanted to see confidence and the vendors wanted to see weakness. I respect that completely. But she confused the inheritance with the lesson. The inheritance was the company, the name, the showroom on Lakeshore. The lesson was the 30 years of showing up. The lesson was the second-hand van, and the cold call list and the decision to begin without knowing if it would work. The lesson was, build something no one can take. Gran Bette understood that this was what she was teaching, not that someone would try to take what I built, though that turned out to be true, but that if you build correctly from your own materials, with your own hands, using your own eye, the thing you make becomes structurally yours in a way that has nothing to do with equity percentages or legal agreements. It is yours because it came from inside you, from the specific way you understand weight and form and what a well-made object feels like on an ordinary Tuesday morning. You cannot negotiate that out of something. You cannot claim 40% of it. It doesn't work that way. If you have ever been told that your work is a pleasant hobby, that the market for what you make is oversaturated, that there is already a perfectly good path built for you, and you are wasting everyone's time by refusing to walk it, I want you to hear this clearly. The path that is built for you is built for someone else's vision of you. The thing you make with your own hands, in rented space, on a budget held together with a grandmother's faith, and your own refusal to stop, that is the only foundation worth standing on. Keep your hands in the clay. The work always tells you where to go next. I still have that test tile on the shelf above my kiln. Unglazed. A thumb impression pressed too hard into raw clay by a 15-year-old who didn't yet know how to be light with the material. I look at it most mornings and I think about how much of what I've built traces directly back to that pressure. Not the pressure of the thumb, but the pressure of being told, quietly and with complete confidence, that what I was making didn't matter. There is a logic to how things unfold that I didn't understand when I was standing in that kitchen watching my mother set my bowl down on the recycling bin. I thought that moment was purely about loss. It wasn't. It was the moment I stopped waiting for permission. And that shift from waiting to moving is the only reason Groundwork Ceramics exists at all. The cause was her dismissal. The effect was my departure. The effect of my departure was 7 years of building something entirely my own. I don't think I would have built it the same way if she had said yes. I think I would have stayed and softened and slowly become someone who made beautiful things for other people's visions instead of her own. What Gran Bette understood, and what took me years to articulate, is that integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself, about what you are and what you're for. She watched me at that birthday party, pressing clay into shapes at 15, and she saw something I couldn't see yet. That I was someone who needed to make things, not manage them, not sell them, not inherit them. She funded that truth quietly for 11 years without ever making it a transaction. That kind of clarity about who you are and what you owe the people who believe in you is not something you can fake. And you cannot build anything lasting on a foundation you don't actually believe in. The intelligence that matters in building something real is not the intelligence of projections and yield percentages. It's the intelligence of paying attention to the material, to the market, to the people working alongside you. Petra showed up an hour before the studio opened for 3 years, not because I asked her to, but because she was paying attention to what we were building and she believed it was worth the early mornings. I try to be worthy of that. I try to notice what the work is asking for and respond to it honestly, the way you respond to clay, which tells you very clearly when you're pushing in the wrong direction. And then there is the matter of simply not stopping. This is the part that nobody talks about because it isn't dramatic. It's just Tuesday. It's just returning to the wheel after a firing that didn't go the way you planned. It's just opening the studio when you don't feel like it, and trusting that the practice will carry you when the inspiration doesn't. Gran Bette deposited money into that account for 11 years. She didn't do it in a grand gesture. She did it in small, consistent increments, the same way you build anything worth having. My mother built something extraordinary. I will never stop meaning that. But she taught me the wrong lesson, or rather, she taught me the right lesson by accident. She showed me what it costs to confuse control with love, and what it looks like when someone mistakes an empire for a family. I chose differently. I hope in whatever way she is able she can see that.